Testing, testing. Okay, this podcast or this recording, in this recording, I want to talk about something that is important to me, and that is what is life? Because the essence of organized complexity is life. In fact, when you look at living things, what you're looking at really is an exposition of organized complexity. Because what makes life different from what we categorize as non-life is a certain flexibility, an adaptability, a rate of change that is sustained, maintained. And I mean, saying that, you could also say that heat engines or internal combustion engines do that. No. In the 5 principles of organized complexity, what I do is I define the essence, the motive of organized complexity as inculcating 3 particular things. It is the evolutionary progression, or the automorphisms, as I like to call them, which is the symmetrical transformations that take place. But this time, symmetrical transformations, group transformations of what? Of functional spaces. And these functional spaces are distilled down to 3 global categories of functions. You have the transport functions, the control functions, and the regenerative functions. These 3 functions, in a particular type of sustained dynamic, is what we perceive as life. But of course, these 3 functions have to undergo different stages of automorphisms. They need to become increasingly complex and more sophisticated in their structure, and then these sophistications connect at different levels in what I call the convergence of knowledge spaces. It is the group transformations that occur and these convergence properties that ultimately yield what I define in my ebook as organized complexity. So when you look at life, what you're looking at is a convergence of knowledge spaces brought into existence and driven by the automorphisms of these 3 classes of functions, or these 3 categories of functions. Now, why did life originate on Earth? I know a lot of people think maybe life may have come from another planet and seeded Earth in the panspermia theory, but it still would not explain what life is and why it originated in the first place. Now, whether on Earth or elsewhere, it is clear that personally I believe that life originated on Earth. And even if an introduction was made by comets or asteroids in the very distant past, that those life forms will be fundamentally no different from the ones found on Earth. The reason, because there are rules governing the evolution or the creation or the spark of life. The spark of life is not mystical, it's physics, it's chemistry, it's mathematics, really. And the way I describe it is this. When an environment becomes increasingly complex, and by complex I mean there are cyclical patterns of behavior within the environment, rainstorms, volcanic eruptions, lightning strikes, weather patterns, climatic patterns, droughts, and all of this geological behavior spanning millennia, maybe millions, maybe even billions of years. All right? In the quiet, relatively quiet location of our solar system. What I'm trying to say is that Earth had a period of time where it was cocooned from the relative noise of the entire galaxy. Because life is the carbonic capture of the cyclical behavior of the environment. the environment becomes the environment becomes very complicated, very complex, and increasingly so that carbon begins to mimic this behavior. What I'm trying to say is that the first cell, apart from having the properties around it that necessitated the creation of the cell or that enabled the creation of the cell, what drove the creation of that cell is the same forces which were driving the earth. Life on earth is a continuation of all the geological processes that occurred on earth. It is a continuation of all earth's processes. So when you look at earth life, you are looking at all of earth's processes as represented by carbon. In fact, you can expand that definition to say that when you look at life, you're looking at the general sum total of dynamisms of the universe. The entire angular momentum of the universe is what goes into the formation, is what becomes captured by carbon. Carbon literally has a organic molecules, organic life has a backbone of carbon. It's always built around a backbone of carbon. And that carbon now has a relationship to oxygen, to hydrogen, to nitrogen, and to what's the last one? I think you have some phosphorus there, and whatever. Phosphorus is essential in the development of higher forms of life, and I'll explain why in a minute. Now, this backbone, the only reason why this backbone can form is because carbon is able to interlink with itself. It's able to form long chain backbones with itself in very complex ways, and the patterns which it forms are numerical patterns. Carbon is the element capable of mimicking the intelligence or the organization encoded within numbers, especially the distribution of prime, or especially the locations of prime numbers. In fact, that difference, what you see as carbon, is the manifestation of that periodic behavior, periodic numerical behavior. Now, when people look at the distribution of prime numbers, there's nothing quite as complex, there's nothing quite as chaotic. They have no rhyme or reason. This has been proven, it has been established for thousands of years, or hundreds of years thereabout. But that's because they're looking at it from a one-dimensional point of view. That's because everyone thinks that there's something called a number line. Well, it doesn't exist. There's nothing like a number line. We live in a three-dimensional universe. Okay? Because the number system is three-dimensional. So it's only when you look at the number system in a three-dimensional way, or in a three-dimensional point of view, that's when you see what the true nature of the distribution of prime numbers really is. It's a three-dimensional structure. Where do you think the three-dimensional nature of the universe came from? From this argument, you begin to see one of the central points of all my arguments is this: that life is an extension. In fact, what we call the laws of physics, which go ahead to build life. The laws of physics go on to generate the laws of chemistry, which go on to generate the laws of biology, blah, blah, blah. But in reality, there's no such thing as biology, chemistry, physics, mathematics. It's all one continuous knowing, all one continuous existence. Okay? It's just to aid understanding we call it these different things. But nature doesn't have any distinctions like that. So, what you see as biological life is mimicking an algorithm, a three-dimensional algorithm, which is encoded in the distribution of prime numbers. And that's why carbon, because of the essential nature of the number 6 to that algorithm, that's why nature responds on a different level of manifestation by creating carbon. I mean, people were amazed. I mean, the prediction for the existence of how stars form carbon, it's been called the first anthropic discovery in science, because the guy who discovered it, can't quite remember his name now, was it Fred Hoyle? I don't know, but he literally staked his career on proving that stars are able to synthesize carbon, and the equations that they were working with at the time told them that when a beryllium atom and a helium atom come together, they have too much energy. They're